Okay, so we are on the top of the hour, and let's get started. Just make sure we are recording, and Camtasia is also recording. Good. So yes, welcome to this webinar. On today's webinar, one of the things I want to share a little about this is why you actually should be testing your SAP PI and also CPI for that matter, because it matters a lot to our integration needs. If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat. That would be good, and we'll try to mute everybody that comes on, and yeah, hopefully we'll get time for some Q&A at the end. So my name is Daniel Graverson. I've been doing integration for 15 years. All different kind of integrations, well, mostly SAP integrations with the various platforms, trying to figure out how these things worked, help customers get to use these as soon as possible. I'm an SAP mentor, and I'm a father, and I guess that takes up quite a bit of time, but it's also rewarding. So one of the things I've always struggled with in integration is a lot of the manual things that you needed to do, and I wanted to find a way that you can actually automate this. And this is a lot about what we will be talking about today, because testing is a large part of your development lifecycle, and if you can automate that one, then it would be really useful. So why do you actually want to do testing? So integration is critical to your business, and you probably, most of you guys here is just just PI developers or integration developers, and not from the business side. But there's actually a large part of this that also is affected by what is happening outside of just the PI system. So we, as developers, we would often see that something fails in the PI system, but this actually has an impact on the business. So one is, obviously, as developers, you don't really understand. So from a development perspective, we would see that a message fails in the PI, and that would require us to do something to fix that, because we need to solve the problems for the business. But there's also an impact for the business. Even though we get to fix this problem at a reasonable time, there could be a problem that you're not able to deliver a production order delivery. So you would say, well, we would try to deliver this on time, but it didn't make it, and we would then have to, because the production planning have run, we would then have to run it or delay the order for tomorrow, and that may mean that we will not create the order correct for the customer. We will break a service level agreement with it, and at some point that may actually mean that we would lose a customer. And I know at least in the automotive industry, this SLA is really important, and you need to be really sure that you're actually able to fulfill these requirements. You also have another cost is, obviously, if you're not able to communicate with your warehouse system or any other production systems that you're using, then it also has a huge cost if you're not able to process this for a number of hours. And obviously this is also an extra cost for both business and developers to fix the find the problem, fix it, and then do some manual resolutions on how these things go about. And I definitely have seen a lot of these places where we have tried to make a change at some point in time, did some smaller changes, but saw that it had, when we were live, it had a greater impact than we originally estimated, and we didn't see those questions there. So there's some different types of testing. So in the SAP PI world, what we'll see is we will have to apply an upgrade or patch or migration. And what we want to see is after we have patched the system, that it's actually going to run the same way as it did before, that there would not be any changes, and we can validate as many changes as possible, and we'll be able to see that nothing is going to affect us long term. It could be the testing the message mappings. I've seen some instances where if you're using the message mappings to its limits, that you would see problems popping up and something was changed and you needed to apply a patch at some point to fix it or fix your message mappings. There's the SAP adapter modules that could change, or your own adapter module. And then you have, with the B2B capabilities, you also have some things there that could actually change. You do have adapter processing, and there is also some potential. So when I mean adapter processing, this is the part from, for instance, the file content conversion, that you need to find a way that you can actually validate and test. Obviously, one of the key things that we see is during the SAP PI or XI lifecycle, there's been some major upgrades from time to time where functionality have changed, going from a 7.31 to 7.5. There has been some changes that have been made, new Java version that obviously can affect the way you're handling your message mappings and stuff like that. So what we've seen is that some of these has been pretty big new features that have been added. When I look at the roadmap, as you can see here below, or if you search for the SAP roadmap, you can find it there, is that from what I can see, there's not that many new features going on that's being released. So there's small features for the adapter processing, that's cross-site script forgery token that's being added to the functionality, and something like that. Obviously it helped, but I don't see that there's like a huge list, backload of changes that will happen in this area. I do see that you want to, the place where I see you want to do it is you want to upgrade the PI system more often if you want to use the CPI on-premise, because that one is giving you, there's a lot of innovation going on, and they're adding a lot of new functionality. So I think in this service pack 14 that was just released, there were maybe 5 new adapters. And if you are, the difference between your current systems and your or the cloud version is too great. When you have done any changes and development in the cloud, there will be actually a large need to convert all of these to older versions. And then the other part is you would also see that you want to be able to do regression tests after you've made a change to your existing system. So that could either be that you want to test do the regression test, validate that this does not affect anything we did not account for or that we did not expect. So that is also a part of this. And you want to run those as often as possible with as low effort as you can. So I don't know with you, but doing modifications to a user-defined function library is something that's kind of a no-go, because you have quite a number of documents or mappings that are using this, and if you make a change, you don't really have an idea what the impact would be. If you had a testing tool in place, then you could actually make these modifications and validate it did not really impact any other things than we expected on. So what I've seen is that if I wanted to do a new version of, or I saw there was a problem with one of my UDF, instead of just creating a new or fixing it, I have always just created a new version of it and used it in those new mappings, and that's not really ideal. But on the other hand, I couldn't really accept the changes that we were making in that way. So just wanted to give you an idea about the SAP's new testing tool, the PIT, what it can do, how it works, and obviously some of the limitations of it. So the idea SAP have is that they want to be able to collect data from your productive system or any other system where you actually have valid test data that you can use. And then from that, let's just call it your productive system, you would get an input file that's being sent and an output file that's being sent. Then you want to take this input file, process it in your development system, and this will give you a new test output, and then you can validate that this test output really looks as you wanted it to. And there is places that we want to say that these parts do differ, and we want to add them as XPaths and say, okay, I know this is a date field, please ignore this. So I think the good part is this is it's free. It comes with your 731 7.5 SP14. It's pretty easy to install. It's just an SCAs, and there's a config wizard you need to perform, and then you need to install the newest version of the Developer Studio. It adds some. You also need to add some roles to your users and figure out how the authorization concept works. There's a lot of different roles, and you need to figure out what are the right ones you add to it. You don't need to do any development on it. And when I look at the roadmap again, it seems like there's going to be improvements through 20, or both in 19 and 20. There'll be some enhancement on it. How much, I have no idea. One of the other cool thing is that it's able to fetch data from your dual stack system. So if you have a dual stack system and are doing migration, it's able to fetch these data, and then you can use them as a way of testing your upgrade. So let me just do the demo first. I think that makes more sense. So here we have the new tool. So you can add your own systems. You can add multiple systems. You have the option here to create a new landscape. You can specify what type of system it is. It has some different scenarios. You can select versions, and you can then create whatever destinations that you want, and this destination then need to point to the system with a valid user on it. So once you've done that, you can create a new test case. And I guess this makes sense if you're taking it from a dual stack system and migrating to a single stack system, then you can use different scenarios, but we'll just use the same as source and target. Then here we can add some integrations objects that we want to test with this package, and we want to select our system. Or select the interfaces that we want. So we can select one here. We're now added one. Then we want to create test data for it. And we select the system that it should be taken from. Select the configuration objects. Oh, maybe I didn't save this. We can have more systems or some scenario that's from just a source system and a target system. And source is if you want to select it from your productive system, and target is where you want to run it. So now we can see here we have data here. We just want 5 messages. Oh, so now it is extracting hopefully 5 messages. And here it's using the web service API, so it will call the web service for message download, try to fetch all of these different messages. Now we can actually see it is done. We have collected these test data. Here we have the option to specify some items we want to ignore. So we can say on the header level we want to ignore this specific field. On item level it's this XPath we want to ignore. So now we have actually created a test case, and if we want to run this, we simply say launch demo. That's a new PI test case. New. We need to select the one we have created, select the test data we want to run with, and if we want to send the message to the receiving system or not. If we select this, the message will then just be terminated in the middle of the processing before it reaches the adapter module. So we can then say run, and then this will send the messages into the system and allow you to actually process them. So we can see the status here. It's running. So now it has run. We can just check the status, but what we need to do is we want to launch the valid verification. And all of these things is then running as different jobs you can do and validate and check what's going on. We can see it has some issues here, which is pretty good for our demo. So we can then view the report. We can show all errors, and then you can see here we got this item here has errors in these areas, and we can then see this specific payload, what are the differences, what we expected and what we got for this. So with this we can see what is changed with the message. Is there any questions? Do put them into the chat. So yeah, it's fairly intuitive to use, and you can set up test cases along the system. So there are some challenges that I find with it. I think one of the biggest is the first test. I'll just cover that in the next slide. As I see it, there's a lot of manual steps that you need to perform to set up these test cases, and you can only set up one test case at a time. Then there's only a limited set of test cases that it support. It support asynchronous and synchronous. It does not allow you to do any testing of modules, so your modules would not be tested. So if you're using EDI or X12, then you would not be able to actually see how the modules perform. And I think that is one of the places where you want to be sure that no upgrade will impact these things. Right now you can only run one interface at a time, so you can only run one test case at a time, and you do need to do the verification. As I see it, it's only possible to see small changes in an item if there is like a structural change or anything like that. Obviously you need to flag it, but it's really difficult to see because at the moment you don't have access to actually seeing what the output of this is, so you cannot do a side-by-side comparison of the document and see what the difference was. Hopefully that's something that's coming, because otherwise you just have this small overview that shows you what's going on. So with the first, so one of the big challenges I do find with it is with the first test case, how do we actually make that? And let's assume you have a 731 system, you want to upgrade to 7.5 SP14 right now. So what you need to do is you need to apply this service node on all your PI systems, and this will give you some more details, or it will improve the web service for monitoring with some extra information that's needed for doing the testing. The problem is that if it's a long time since you have done any patching of your system, this will be so this one has just been released. You would then have to do a huge upgrade of the system in order to actually get these data. So you patch the system, and you cannot test this patch with the SAP tool, so you would have to do the testing manually, or not test. And as I see it, from my perspective, a patch is kind of the same as doing a SP upgrade. It is adding some fixes around the different areas that you don't really know, and then you need to figure out how you can actually test it. So you need to test it manually. Then once you have applied this patch on all your landscape, you then need to collect data on your from your productive system and run them on your SP14, let's call it your development system or sandbox system. And then you want to do the comparison there. And if there's any difference, you would have to figure out what was the real difference here, and how do we actually find what was going on and why was it so different. So I think this is one of the big challenges with it, that it takes 2 service packs to actually be able to test and use the tool. As I see it, the patch that you apply on the ABAP stack is fairly limited, and I would assume that that's just adding some web services to it. So I think that one is a lot simpler, but this one I would be cautious about, unless obviously you are on a fairly new support package. So we did the demo. So why do you think you actually need a better tool? So first off, you want to be able to test the first upgrade that you're making. We also want to make it a lot easier to use, because you want to be able to collect test data in a faster way, more test data, more patterns, more module or testing module bridges. We do support async sync bridge and sync async bridge, EDI and comparison. There we support EDIFACT, XML text binary, and JSON comparison. So you get a lot more comparisons that you can actually make. You can run multiple tests at the same time, so it's pretty easy to group these tests together and just run them once, or run from once, and you can use tests from the first upgrade, and you can generate. So the cool thing about having the test tool in a separate application is that it's not affected by the upgrade cycle of your PI system. So you can run tests before you upgrade and after the upgrade, and then it should be the same. It integrates with your development lifecycle tool, or it is a development lifecycle tool that also allows you to actually see what's changed. And then the tool supports both PI and CPI in just one application. So let me show you what we can do with this. So here you are adding the systems. We do have in the agent tab, we can connect multiple systems. We have some different settings. We can use the SAP log module that we can add to the processing chain. We prefer using our own module that you can add because it's a lot faster and has a better testing capability. But we can also, as SAP, use the SAP logging capability, where we're just looking at the messages inside of the ICO. So if I want to do a test case on some data, so we have a set of interfaces here. They're all kind of the same, and I want to create a scenario for it for our invoice. So we'll create a new. We'll collect three messages from each of them, and for me, it's also important to know who the supplier of these data is. So if, for instance, we're sending invoices, 1,000 invoices, and we're sending 900 to one vendor, then it may be a good idea just to scale it down so we are normalizing and sending equally amount, or ensuring that we can send the correct messages to each. So we'll save our test case. So this will then create a test case with these data. And what we can then do is we can start a recording of this, and this then we'll do the API calls to go in, add these modules to processing chain. And once that have been done, we would then start the recording and process these messages. So let me just start the processing of these. I can obviously see I'm logged in. So if there's any questions, to put them into the chat. I need some kind of a small web service I can just call, and that will process these data for me. Okay, so hopefully now we have collected some data. So for these three interfaces, we have collected data because we have triggered the message, and then so with this module we are not looking at past archive, we're just looking at the next 5 or 10 or 100 messages that are coming in on these scenarios. So I want to create test cases on this. So now I can create a test case. We then have some test cases that we already created in here. We can see the partner number for these, and we would then have the option to go in and normalize these. Let me just check one thing here in the configuration. So this is how we are configuring. So you can see here there's a lot of configuration that you can set up in this case. So do we want to use the splitter for this scenario? Do we want to? So we can also use the number range module if you want to generate unique numbers each time. We can use the sync response and insert that into the payload. And we can do not send the message, so the message will fail in the module, and then it will not be delivered to the application. And then yeah, if we should test with the third state. Oh, did I forget to save? I forgot to save. So obviously we are running a lot of tests on the same things and adding a lot of test cases to it. So now I can run it, and I can run it on multiple systems that have been set up with mappings. So we'll just run here, and then this will send these messages into the system. We can check out results, and obviously this one will be the interesting one. So we can see the variation. We can see that there's actually a difference here, and we can see it's actually this field, and now I just want to add this to my ignore list. So right now it will be added, and next time we run it, we will see that this one is just ignored, and it will not cause an error. We can download a report that says how this test run was. So we can actually see what was going on in it, which messages we have tested. So we can see all the data here, what was expected and what was received across the full landscape. I think it will just take the first couple of lines of these changes. Otherwise, you can drill deeper into it and see the testing results here. So that's a little of how easy it is to use, run these things in a generic way. We also have the option, so we have our test case here, to anonymize some of these data. And obviously it makes a lot of sense if you have sensitive data, HR, banking data, and or customer data that you want to ignore. Then you can simply just go in here, select a quantity. So let's say we want to do some obfuscation of the quantity for some reason. So we can simply just say generate from value. We know that the quantity is like 2 numbers. Then it will just create random values in that specific fields. We also have the option, so let's just save there. So as you can see here in the cell information, we are using these annotation and can then insert random real names. So it will look like whatever, Rebecca, Tina, Daniel. In that way, we will then create a new test case based on this, run it through the first time, because obviously we don't know what this obfuscated output would be like once you're running it in comparison mode. So this is the testing capabilities. Then we also have the ability to actually see what was changed on your landscape. So we can go in and see here, there's actually one channel here that has a lot of revisions. So curious what's going on here, we can actually go in, drill in, view comparison. So we can see that there was a date change, that's okay. And here we can see that there was actually added or removed a module for some reason. And this is not in this, so it's really easy to actually see what is being changed. If we want to do a ticket, so a lot of you guys would have a service request that you're creating for some specific business reason that the business want. You have a mapping change. To fix the invoice. And you can specify different information on it. So it's not a fully fledged ticketing system, but it's just a representation of it, and you can then link to this this object. But the cool thing here is then you can add any type of objects that you have. So we can add these icons. So now we know that we have added these icons. If we had added message mappings, we could also add all the objects. It would then know the hierarchy of these objects. So once we go to our test tab, we can look up relevant test data, and we can see we got 13 here. So we can select some test cases, add them to our system, and it will then say, okay, we know that there's also some other areas that you needed to test, but you haven't created any test case for it, and then you obviously need to create some test data for these scenarios. You can then run them, And this will then create like a virtual testing template, just as we saw before. You can see the data and the results of running these messages fairly easy. So we can open testing template here, and you can see it looks like the same as we had before. We have the results. It's just unfinished, so there's some scheduled jobs that are occurring and creating these jobs, and ensuring that they are, once we have collected all test data, they're processed and delivered in the right way. So this allows you actually to understand and test, if you have a user-defined function, all the interfaces that's affected by this. And once you can say, okay, we have actually got a report that says this this change was done. We have tested it with these test data, and can prove that it didn't affect anything unexpected. And we can then say, okay, we know that this was changed as part of it, and then mark that as the new test case for this scenario. Then, yeah, just wanted to briefly say we also have a support tool that allow you to take the component-based methods alerts and set up processing of these. So you can set up rules, send them to Jira or whatever application you have to handle the processing, instead of creating a lot of custom application to handle this. It's just one integrated application. And what you can then say, if you have actually an alert that has been triggered in your productive system, you can then create a ticket or assign it to an existing ticket. So we can actually just assign it to this one. And then we know we have test data, we can create test data for the specific instance and why this was happening. Yes, so if there's any questions, you can put them into the chat. So obviously there's some, as we talked about in the beginning, there's some reasons why you actually want to have a testing tool in place. And I think one of the big areas is actually you have consultants, you have people that are leaving, and once they leave, they take a lot of the knowledge of what's on in your organization, how to test, what should be working with these things on. So if you don't have a documented way of handling these different things, and I think a lot of business people, well, they're also there for an extended duration and know something about how to test these things, but they tend to leave from time to time, and then you have to figure out, how do we actually test this patch that someone figured out they wanted to do. And if you have a testing tool in place, then you can actually say, okay, show this was the things that was actually happening in this place, and this was what we wanted to test. And then you have a difference you can do from it. In the short term, I think the big thing is you can actually be able to do your upgrade faster, because you don't need to spend a lot of manual effort. And some of our clients have been using the tools for upgrades, where they've said, well, we just want to send our messages in. Before and after the upgrade, show it to the business, say, okay, this is what we've done with the upgrade. They will then do some extra tests just to validate the things that we're not testing, like the adapter processing. Then you also have faster changes, deployment of your changes to production in a validated fashion, because you can actually run these tests a lot faster. And so normally, if you wanted to get the business to do any testing, they would have to spend some time on creating a test case. And most of the time, the business experts I've worked with will just create like a one-line item purchase order to test. And the only thing that you're actually testing here is there's a connection, and that this small fix you created works, but it doesn't really mean if anything else was fixed. Longer term benefits would be less errors into your integrations. It will be better documentation of your changes, and you would actually be able to fix interfaces even when developers or business experts leave, because you have an idea about what it should be like, and you would have a more stable environment. So obviously another area of any of these things is how do we actually make a business case for it, and testing does sound kind of boring, and it's pretty difficult to actually figure out how this should work. So I've created a blog where I'm just trying to showcase some of these things, and you can see the link here and open it and see some of these data, and download the Excel and do your calculations for yourself. So we have estimated an hourly cost of 80 euros per hour, and obviously this depends on your figure. There's a number of ICOs that you have, a number of changes that you need, and a number of support packages you want to apply each year. So I have estimated that it takes 120 minutes or 2 hours to test every time you have an ICO that needs to be changed. I'm not sure if that is too much or too little, but I think it's probably okay. And that means if you have the 300 changes, it will be around 48,000 euros a year just for testing these things. If you have 2 support packages of 200 interfaces and you spend an hour for testing each of them, it will cost you 32,000 a year. And obviously I would need to adjust this also and see how you can actually use the SAP tool, what the performance of that one would be. So for normal, if you want to use the ERT, you can actually get it for like 15,000 a year, depending on the scope of your change, number of interfaces. But in this instance, we have 200 interfaces. Then, as you can see, that there's some setting up cost. Obviously, you need to spend some time installing and figure out how it runs. But then you can run the test cases each time, and it will only take like 10 minutes, and that saves quite a bit of money on that one. And the support packages is also a lot easier. There will still need to be some testing on this if you want to test the adapter modules. So I think this is the installation testing if you have it down here. So as you can see, it's quite a reduction in price. And as we talked about in the beginning, there's actually a lot of impacts, not only internally but also externally. Relationship with your partner, legal requirements. If you're not able to actually send these electronic invoices for a period of time, it's pretty difficult to get around that, and you may get fined or get into some kind of problems with the authorities. And obviously it costs money. You need to fix a problem, test it, and validate it again with business. Obviously you can skip the testing, and I've just tried to say some of these things. So a support case may cost 200 or 300 euros if you want to fix it. And there may be 30 of these a year, and obviously you can adjust these to match. What I just wanted to actually show was there is actually a cost of not testing, and it can be difficult estimating what it would really be like. So one customer, they applied a support package and later found out, there was actually some pretty difficult changes that they didn't really know what that was affecting. So I think it was some of their, I don't know if it was invoice orders or something like that were not being processed correctly and were giving problems. And Then there's also the lost business. If you lose a customer, I would reckon that a lot of customers you have EDI with would be a lot higher price than 20,000 euros. And obviously, if you have a system that's down for a period of time, it also has quite a huge cost. And I would assume that it is probably more than the 100,000 euros for a cost. So I'm not sure if you can add these things up and create them together, but at some point it makes a lot of sense. At least to consider that there's other costs than just the specific testing, but there's actually some other business values of it. So the other thing when we're dealing with this is also the documentation, and you want to document things correctly and with as low effort as possible. And I would recommend that every time you need to do a change, it's at least 90 minutes of documentation to ensure that you have documented these things correctly. With the ERT applications, it is a lot easier to document these things, and you can document it with test cases than all these things together. So instead of 36,000, it will be like 16,000 with the DevOps addition to your testing capabilities. Yeah, if you want to try it out, you can try it out. There's a free trial at figaf.com/IRT. And yeah, there you can test it. There's it's pretty easy to use, install, and if there's any questions, do put them into the chat. We can do some specific scenarios if there's anything that you would like to see. But for a proof of concept, it can actually run on your laptop, connect to the PI system that you have, and that makes it a lot easier to actually get started and see what the tool can do. Yeah, you don't need to request a license. It's just there's some limitations. You cannot create too many test cases and run too many tests, but yeah, you can see what the tool can do and all the different areas, both from the support, the testing, the documentation. And for CPI, we do have quite a lot of other functionalities that makes a lot of the changes and things there. So I do hope that you want to check it out and see what it can do to make your testing a little easier when you're doing it.